Get a 5-minute business book review, pivotal moments with failed businesses, and hear an interview with a business disruptor who will share their $10,000 mistake. This is the Forward Motion Business Show with Professor Ken and Professor Paul A Marino. Hit new heights. Start with Forward Motion.
Hey, welcome to the Motion Business Show. I'm Professor Ken.
And I'm Professor Paul Marino.
And we're great to be back here in studio here at United International College. And we have Shellie Solomon, the president of Children of Inmates, with us. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate you being here. And Paul is we're going to go through a bunch of different things today. We're going to focus on for our business book, we're going to focus on range, as sort of a book on specialization, which will have some breakdown and commentary. And for our business case, we'll talk about Polaroid, because I think Polaroid really sums up this particular specialization segment.
No
because
question.
Right, because they didn't innovate, they weren't really unique in what they did. And then Shellie will give us some background on the Children of Inmates and how she's making an impact and innovating here in the community. So we look forward to that as well. So Paul, why don't you start us off? Give us a brief intro, since you know Shellie for some time, and let's start the conversation there.
Well, I've known Shellie for some time, and I'm very impressed with the work she does, and I'm very impressed the way she goes about it. She's one of the few women who actually, that I've met anyway, who have an actual PhD in this particular field. And she's very analytical. I read her thesis, and it's the kind of thesis you have to read every chapter 2 or 3 times to understand exactly what she's going at. But she uses a very scientific approach, and she kind of breaks that down to its simplest blocks and applies that locally. So Shellie, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about Children of Inmates, and what you're focused on, and what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, for having me. I'm Ken. I'm excited to be here. So with Children of Inmates, I always start with the fact that I'm an accidental criminologist. I did not, I studied economics and land and natural resource economics, and but ended up working at the Justice Department, and then ended up working on some social problems when I was working. So I tend to start things very upside down. I didn't start out as a child advocate at all, but I got pulled into being a child advocate. And with Children of Inmates, we were trying to figure out how to work on recidivism, particularly with gun violence, because we were looking at, okay, who picks up a gun and shoots, and
Right.
and criminals have a criminal career, right? So we were looking at, okay, how do we get people re-entered more? And we were working with the faith-based groups, and this group of women came and said, hey, we're not really into working with ex-offenders, but can you help them? Their children, we think, have some challenges, and we'd like to work with them. And I was like, okay, I'll help you. And went to a meeting. They were trying to write a grant, and I realized I didn't know how to write a grant. So I was like, oh, okay, let me help you, because I knew about grants. But I was like, I don't know anything about kids. So y'all know what to do with these kids, right? And they're like, yeah. So we won the grant. And then I realized with Children of Inmates that when I was writing the grant, everything, in 2008, which was about 15 years ago. I mean, there wasn't a lot known about how incarceration affects children. And there's sort of like this forgotten population that don't get picked up in any system. They're not necessarily in the social service system. They're not picked up in the criminal justice system. They're just kind of, they're out there silently, victimized by what's going on. And, there wasn't a lot known about how to serve them. And that's kind of how I got involved, is that we had our first event, and I realized, okay, these kids need a lot more than a mentor. There's a lot going on here.
Sure.
These kids are facing a very difficult situation. So.
Well, if I understand it correctly, when you look at the statistics, foster children have a very difficult time, but Children of Inmates are even further more difficult dealing with than a foster population. They have some very unique issues that they have to deal with, correct?
Well, I don't know if they're more difficult than foster kids, but there's certainly a side and a system. I think they end up in a more difficult position because there's no system that picks them up.
Yeah,
With
that's what I was
foster care
referring to.
children, a system picks them up, the
Right.
Department of Children and Families. But when children of inmates, I mean, basically an arrest occurs. The officer asks if there's children present. They'll ask, who do you want to take care of your kids? And, they'll indicate either the other biological parent or, somebody nearby. And that's it. There's no
Right.
follow-up done with these kids to
Right.
figure out, are they okay or what's happened with them. And so in that sense, I think they do have a different kind because there's a lot of stigma and
Right.
shame associated with incarceration. And the kids have no way to talk about it. As a school resource officer said to me once, if a kid tells us their parents incarcerated, we just kind of look at our sheet and there's no box to check.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So what, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you're great with big data. I know you do a lot of analytical stuff. Every time I go see Shellie, I leave with a book. She always hands me a book, so I get homework to do. But, what's some of the key takeaways? How do you deal with this? What's the secret? What have you synthesized from this process?
Well, I think, from this process, what I realized, we've ended up serving about 2,500 kids, which, anytime you get anytime you get over like 100, 150, you're going to get a distribution of types of problems and challenges and successes with kids, And so, from a data point of view, what I try to do is look at, okay, who are the kids who have the hardest time? Well, who are the kids on the tail of a statistical curve? So when you're thinking about data, what you're trying to do is look at that data over time. And then see who these kids are who are the most challenged. That's one thing with the data. As you're collecting all this information about these kids and watching them and seeing they grow. The other thing is the watching them and seeing as they grow, right? And what I've learned is that you can track data, just asking the kids how they feel a certain day. And what you can see is much like an economics curve, right? You can see that data either trend up or trend down. But they'll have good days and bad days, so you have to have trend lines to figure out how they're moving along.
Well, that's always impressed me about your organization and about you. You speak to a lot of organizations, and I don't know a lot of organizations. I'm sure there's a million good ones out there, but you take a very statistical approach. You take a very data approach. And I remember reading your thesis where you talked about going into a zip code and actually trying to raise the level of that zip code. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, in working with the kids and working on gun violence and working across the criminal justice and the social service system, what I've come to realize is that, there's a lot of crossover, and it really is a matter of figuring out where is that crossover. And we can do that with geographic data, and we can analyze that data using techniques actually out of the physical sciences. So if you think about, you go mine for oil and gas, right? If you're going to punch a hole in the ocean, you're going to precisely know where to punch that hole. Well, those same methodologies can be applied to solving social problems. We can collect data if you treat community surveys or even crime data like data that you get on soil. You can actually use mapping and identify precisely where you need to be, down to the street, the block level. And what we found over time is in working in these working precisely at the block or precisely with the right families, you can affect the entire neighborhood and dissipate the problems that they're solving. And I really think that this is the direction that we've learned from business. Business is very focused on using data. The big data thing, I think the thing that got me started was whenever Walmart, they realized after hurricanes, we liked blueberry Pop-Tarts because they mined their data, right? And so they put them in the aisles, and that's a precise thing. Well, the same types of activities we can do with data to learn about social problems, and we should.
So those trends that you're talking about, because, in my marketing life, we always look at trends, but I don't look at trends on a weekly basis, because in the business world, the trend for a week doesn't really tell me anything. So we have to look at blocks of 4 weeks, or blocks of 3 months, quarters, or even an annual trend. So historically, let's say, I'll give you an example. So we all know what happened in 2020. 2019 obviously was different than 2020 from a business point of view. You mentioned products selling at a Walmart, let's say. So in 2019, product will sell X amount of volume because 2019 was a normal year. 2020, of course, was a COVID year. So now you look at historicals, here we are in 2021. You cannot really depend and rely on 2020 and 2021 to give you 2022 data because it's so skewed. You might have to go back to 2019 data, right? Now, this is the reason why I brought that up today, and I can't cite to you the report, but I was listening to the radio, and they brought out an interesting study. We're finding now that the teenagers, because of COVID, are going to be much more mentally mental health challenged because of COVID. That's a new report, a new study that came out. I mean, it was pretty obvious to me. I mean, I had a couple teenagers going home. If you have a house and there's a teenager in the house during COVID, you could obviously see that they're going out of their mind, right? But I thought it was interesting because we don't know what's going to happen yet. So I think all the norms that we had in 19, and now we had 20 and 21 going into 22. How do you know, well, this is going to happen? Because we have the last 3 years, I've been one or the other or in the middle. So it's really hard to predict, right?
It is. And I think, one of the things that I've realized crossing all of these genres, or I'd say, is that, working with children of inmates and families, a lot of who have chronic generational poverty, you're really playing the long game. I mean, the real long game, not, we've had kids in our program for 15 years. They now have their own children, right? And so when we're looking at those trends, what I'm doing is realizing that maybe we weren't able to really affect the kids that were in the program in our view, right? Maybe their trend line didn't shift so much, but what I'm seeing is what they do with their children. So they will take their children, and like I have a kid, she's a mess. I mean, I'm not just going to say she's a mess, right? She's always been a mess. Her mom, she was 2 when her mom was incarcerated. Her father was also incarcerated.
Wow.
She used to tell me, I don't know why you mess with me. It's in my DNA, right? But this child had a child at 18. Number one, her mom was 15 when she had her.
Mm-hmm.
So she waited. She was 18 when she had a child. So I consider that a good thing, right?
That's better.
The second thing is that baby, regardless of what's going on in her world, she makes sure she gets that baby to an early start program. She's very dedicated. So that's the kind of shifts I'm talking about over time. Now, 2018, 2019, we're okay years. 2020, 21 is going to affect these kids, and you're going to have this blip in your data. But one of the things that when it happened was we immediately pivoted to start working with these kids on a weekly basis and really reach out to them and try to, because they haven't been able to see their parents in 2 years. Right. Because I mean, it's hard.
You can't go in, right?
They've started letting visitation occur, but for a long time there was no visitation, and we haven't been able to do our bonding visits because it's we're going to start redoing it, but it's been hard. So the question is then, how do you keep them on that track even with that blip? How do you still keep that trend line going up?
Right.
And what we've done is a lot of crazy stuff. We're doing skateboarding. And, these kids need a way out and to breathe, lots of different hobbies. And I think that's where you go back to your own childhood and go, okay, what did my parents do?
Yeah.
Right.
True. Yeah. Listen, I grew up in New York, and we were never in the house. We were always in the street. We were just talking about, there's a game in New York called Shellie. It's a game that you play with bottle caps, and you draw a board in the street, literally in the street. You draw a board and you shoot bottles. It's almost like marbles. You shoot bottle caps, and every once in a while someone will say car, you get out of the street and the car will drive by and you go back to playing the game. That's just one thing. Kick the can. All these things outdoors, I think is so much better than what we have today, electronics and all that stuff. And we had a guest last week. We were talking about that, the effects of the electronics. I mean, I wouldn't want to be a 12-year-old right now because, I mean, you got so many things that seem like being pointed dead at you, challenging, right? To be a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, all the pressures that you have must be crazy.
Well, I think it is, but I also think that the kids, as the book Range said, the kids are getting smarter, right? And they're moving faster.
True.
Every generation, even though we don't see it, but every generation's moving ahead faster than we are. But I think it's interesting. Like the skateboarding's been fascinating with me, right? Because the kids, they understand the geometry of the ramps and stuff, right? At young ages, and I'm like, how do you know all that? You know, but
Yeah.
I think
They really get into it at a
Yeah.
detailed level, you know, what kind of wheels you have and what kind of casters you have. I mean, it's not skateboarding like when we were children. Now it's an art. But you mentioned range. I mean, you gave me that book. I was very impressed with it. It kind of dovetailed into Friedman's The World is Flat. But, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your takeaway from that book?
Well, I mean, Range for me was actually a very validating book for me personally, because I've always felt like I was a little off track. You know, I never specialized very well. I've always found more fun in the irony of it. And Range talks about why, and the benefits of thinking through problems and why failure is so important, you know, and I fail a lot. And,
Right.
you know, and failing is really how you learn and how you move forward. And talking about that and the ability that really, as we move into this age where there's so much information, the ability to be able to problem solve across problems
Right.
and to be able to think through problems is so valuable compared to specialization.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things I see. Like, everybody talks about best practices, and, you know, it drives me crazy because, you know, best practices are best practices in that moment, in that time.
Right.
True.
And it's not clear, and we've seen it over and over research, that when you pick that up and move it to a different place, it's not necessarily a best practice anymore, because, you know, problems are different. The world
Different
is
environment,
very
yeah.
complex. Children are very complex. And we go
Mhm.
back to data, you know, you can use the data to do individualized solutions.
Well, you mentioned to me, and it's way over my head, so excuse me. You're doing some really groundbreaking stuff with some data that's coming out of Harvard with a professor. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, I mean, one of the people now I look up to now is Raj Chetty at Harvard, and what he's done is taken all of the IRS data and combined it with the census data, and then and done geographic information system analysis, or GIS analysis, on that data to find, you know, what zip codes and what's happening in a zip code, and where are the best zip codes, and where should you move, and, you know, a whole bunch of different things he does with this combining of this
Mhm.
big data. So now the question is, okay, how do you take his information, which is still a large geographic area because it's at a zip code,
It's like a
and get
macro level.
yeah, and get it down. Well, he's got it down to the zip code, but how do you get it, or the census tract? How do you get that data down to actually the block level, where in the individual kids are living? And how do you start to change those blocks up? And that's where I really get fascinated, is like, how do we, you know, and that's what I do, is we do door-to-door surveys. We're collecting this information, but always putting it in a geographic context, because that is environment around where these social problems are going. And then how do you solve it at that level?
Right.
So you're taking this big data and the conclusions that he's drawing from this big data, if I understand you correctly,
Mhm.
and you're kind of applying it on a day-to-day basis. You're kind of boiling it down to its synthesis and using it as a practice at the street level. Is that correct?
Yes, that's sort of like my motivation, right? It has always been my motivation for doing this work is, can you take research
Mm-hmm.
and actually implement it in practice?
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of research goes from, you either have the classical research that's to understand the problem, or you have research that's evaluative research. And evaluative research, I think people get wrong, because they think, oh, well, it tells you does it work or does it not work. That's
Right.
not what evaluations are about. Evaluations are like, how does it work, and what components of it work in what ways together. And that's what I like, is being able to take that data about what's going on and then bring it down and then evaluate and figure out, how does it work for this individual child or
Right.
this individual family?
Right.
And how does that information explain what's happening to this child who lives a block away from where all the homicides are occurring, right?
Mhm.
What is that transition in terms of the type of mental health issues that they then face? And how do we think about that differently?
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting because, you know, we as a business show, we talk about different things, but I spent a lot of time understanding data and analytics and trying to figure things out. If you could imagine a large, you know, multi-state territory, and we sell many different products in all these different retailers, different stores. and we have the macro saying, okay, this product didn't perform, why didn't it perform? But then when you dive down to that one particular store, you learn something that you didn't have at that top level. As an example, I know I'm not comparing the issues that the children have versus a loaf of bread or anything like that, but the truth is that there are issues at the micro level that you can't see from up here, that you really got to go into that local area to really see what's going on. And I think that's valuable because every life and every environment is different. So you can't say, okay, everybody is like this, so everybody should be okay. But then you get down to one particular child and everyone has their own life story, right?
They do have their own life story, but then you go back up, right? And
Yeah.
so it is this iterative process, because we have the ability to take those individual stories and turn it back into data. One of the
True.
things
Yeah.
I say is I take all these pictures, right? And I've been doing a lot of this, right, where you code video or you code pictures, right? And I always say, what does it take to create 100,000 smiles, right? It's one smile at a time.
One smile at a time.
But you're capturing that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and when you think about it, there are a lot of comparisons in business, right? It's like, how many items sell off the bottom shelf versus the middle shelf?
Yeah, and that's all science, by the way.
It's
We know that
science.
because of science, right?
It's
Yeah.
the same that needs to be applied.
Yeah.
Business needs to help social services figure out how to apply some of those principles, because it works the same.
Yeah, isn't that an interesting concept, though? I mean, look at, I don't know what Google has or doesn't have. Let's just say we all know what kind of a company it is, but the analytics that they have, right? And my specialty is marketing, digital marketing, and stuff like that. And I could tell you just about anything you need to know about somebody with all these back-end analytics. Can we take all that information and apply it to more of a social application? Think about that. I mean,
No, it's very powerful. I mean, think Amazon knows what you want to read, right?
Right.
Well, what if you then took that data for children and said, okay, have these kids do this. Now tell me what reading levels are they at and what zip codes.
Yeah, and there's predictive behaviors that you can pull into that, right?
Exactly.
Based on past performances, past behaviors, you can get predictive analysis on that. So that I think that'll be incredible if we could do that. Instead of selling one more widget, we can help one more child. Wouldn't that be interesting if we could do that?
No, you can. And I think that's where business, it's going to take a village for us to turn this around. We did the mass incarceration, but we have homicides rates have been up.
Yeah.
And if we want to make these changes, then that's where business and the private sector and government need to come together and do these systemic responses. I mean, I think, one of the ways to protect your tax dollars is to get involved in how your tax dollars are invested.
Right.
I think what we're seeing now with the some of the things that are happening to big businesses now, I think they're going to realize, if they haven't already, a lot of them have, that they need to partner up with people like you to address the social issues at the micro level. I know you're planning some really interesting stuff. I know you mentioned this gentleman from Harvard. I know you're planning on doing some real deep dives into that. Can you share some of that with us? What's in the back of your mind?
Well, in the back of my mind is to really work with these kids, and take the data that we have, because we have worked with about 6,000 kids at this point, and really try to understand, we know where they're placed and everything, and really understand some of the challenges that they're faced, and then to be able to work through that and be able to create pathways for them out faster than we're doing right now. And that's really the thing, is how do you create pathways and create successes for these kids? I mean, one of the things that we know from research is that in a criminal career, epiphanal moments are one of the big factors that'll change a criminal career. Now, you can't cause an epiphany to happen, but what you can do is facilitate situations in which epiphanies can occur, right? And that's really what we're about, is how do you create enough situations where these epiphanies can occur, that you can cause these shifts in families that have struggled for a long time. Because when you look at success story after success story, and I love to read business and rags to riches, right? It was epiphanal moments, and they have these memories. So how do we create those epiphanal moments for these kids and for their families as they move back? And I've seen it, right? When we do these bonding visits, I had a gentleman, he had his daughter on his lap, and he's just bawling. And I was like, okay, what? And I go, well, you okay? What's up, dude? And he's like, well, I just realized with my parents, we never did a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
We never played a game. And
Yeah.
it was that simple, right? That he was able to have that. So, and it's from the simple to the range, but I look to Disney, right? Disney creates epiphanal moments on a regular basis, right?
Right.
Yeah. They're one of
So
the best at it.
what can we learn from what
I
they do?
remember that was the first book you gave me that talked about epiphanal moments
Mhm.
and how important they are, and how the people who have transitioned out of this life to a productive life all had this epiphanal moment. And I think there was 3 that they talked about were very powerful. So yeah, I think you're right about that.
And I think it's important because you have to listen. I really believe in cycle breaking. I know that I grew up in Queens, in New York. It was an okay neighborhood, and some would say it's not such an okay neighborhood. But you have to break cycles. If you keep in that cycle, then you'll always stay in that cycle. You got to figure out a way to have that epiphany moment to break out of that cycle. Otherwise, it just keeps spinning. And I remember years ago, I saw an Anthony Robbins. I like all these motivational guys, and Anthony Robbins was out there, and he says something that's really that really stuck with me. He says, that spiral thing we talk about. Well, a spiral can go up as well as go down. If you stay going down that spiral, guess what? You're always going to go down that spiral. But if you can figure out how to reverse that spiral and get the direction going the other way, you can maintain that and build it up too. And I think that's important too. That's all part of it, right? How do you get out of this and get into something new? So,
and part of it is I think as society have to reach down and give them a hand to pull them up out of that, to turn the spiral around. And I see that in the data. But it is a long game.
Yeah.
It's a long game. But I think that's one of the saddest things when I hear people, they're like, oh, you deal with chronic families, is there any chance to work with chronic families? And I'm like, well, of course there is. I mean, why would we not? I don't believe it's a case where, where you have a failing school or you have a failing situation and you just keep doing the same thing. You have to do something different.
Right.
But, we can do something different, and we have the data and the ability to do things different and to see quickly whether it's having any impact using trends.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, Paul, the range. Let's talk about that a minute in the sense of some of the lessons that we pulled out of that book, and that's share that with us. The author of that book again.
The author is David Epstein, and it was actually given to me by Shellie. Every time she meets with me, I get homework to do. So I love meeting with her, but it's work.
Yeah,
it's work. But anyway, he talks about, in the complex world that we're dealing with, and all the specialties that are coming into our world. In his opinion, it's going to be the generalist who is most successful, because that person is going to be able to see the trends. That person is going to be able to connect all the specialists together. And it dovetails very neatly into the Friedman book, The World is Flat, because Friedman makes the same conclusions, that it is the generalist who's going to be able to put together all of these sophisticated components to make a model or a company or a strategy that's going to be enduring.
Yeah.
Do I have that correct, Shellie? Is that your view of it?
Yeah, that's what I get out of it, is that it is the generalist who can problem solve their way through. And and I think you said it, sometimes people are so much specialists they can't see the problem, and they can't find the solution. He gives all these examples from NASA and other places, but I think that that's what the beauty of the book is how to be how people who can traverse different topics, different subjects, and look at things, maybe turn the problem upside down. He talks about a gentleman that, would go in and just do crazy things in his lab every weekend, right? Because he was curious.
Yeah. And that's interesting because, you guys had introduced the book to me, and I went back and looked at some of the summaries too. And I remember my mentor, Harvey, he basically, when I was early 20s, he said, listen, Ken, you gotta you got to focus, because I was always one of these guys all over the place. I was, left, right, up, down, all over the place. He says, you got to focus, and I love your energy, but let me, he always just say, I can turn down the fire, but I can't turn up the fire, right? I'd rather have the fire in me. And now into the corporate world, and there was something in there I picked up, was cross-functional teams. And that was such a strong buzzword, a strong topic, right? At all the managerial levels, I was like, you got to be cross-functional. So you not only do you need to know how to turn a computer on, you need how to boot the computer up, right? You need to how to do all these different things. So you need to be a little more generalist in that type of thing. And he said something in here that was really, I found interesting, was the knowledge from many domains, where you have to have that knowledge from all these different areas of life. In today's environment, I think that's so true, though, because I'll give you an example. So I'm always in digital. I'm in the digital world, right? I'm on the computer. I don't know, probably all of us are on the computer 12 hours a day, whatever the number is. So we're all about the same age. We took elementary school, and I'm at elementary school and early high school. Remember something called the typewriter lessons, or typewriter things that we took? They taught us how to use the QWERTY board and how to type and all that stuff. Remember those days? They don't teach that in school now. Yet that's all we do is sit at a computer all day long.
They don't teach phonics either.
So, but how do our children learn this? Because they learn it, so they're becoming more general. Yet this is the machine that we use every single day. So I think that makes so much sense. Where if you have to have that global, not that global picture, that global image, but you have to have a little more knowledge and everything. But one small thing I probably would take a position on is, I do think even as a generalist, you do have to have some subject matter expertise in something, right? Like in your case, you might be a generalist, but you have a subject matter expertise in dealing with children of inmates. I have a subject matter expert in dealing with products, knowing how to get a product on the shelf. So Paul has a subject matter expertise in finance and things like that. So we could do a lot of things, but I think you do need to have a wheelhouse, right? You got to have a place that you can say, this is what I'm really good at, not just a generalist.
Well, you take what you just said, someone comes into the studio and puts the three of us together to do a program or develop something. That's what I think range is all about. He's taking these, or she's taking these highly, highly educated people and bringing them together. It's almost like when they do, I got to talk to some people who are programmers in Silicon Valley, and when they do a program, they got a specialist doing the interface, they got a specialist doing the graphics, they got the specialist doing the background. So they're bringing together all these highly talented people, right, to solve a problem. And that's what always impressed me about Shellie. She's so data driven, she's so meticulous in her research, and it comes through in her PhD thesis, is that she's bringing together all of these people on a scientific method to attack this problem.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, the what I got out of the book. I mean, I'm a very math-driven person. When I was in high school, I took 6 math courses for my electives. I'm a true nerd.
Yeah,
yeah,
God bless you.
I would say better you than me.
I did too, and it was the same class 3 times.
but I when you think about it,
is that the same thing?
No.
Music is math.
Yes.
There's
Yes.
and so, like, when I did my thesis, one of the things that I wanted to do was take the physical sciences, right, what I'd learned about oil and gas, and try to apply it to social services, right?
That's what.
And it was that crossover that gave me that unique
Right.
that unique thing to get the PhD. Now,
Right.
it almost cost me the PhD because nobody knew what the heck I was doing, right? And I
Right.
had to go meet with a soil scientist to figure out how to do it all. But I think that to me is the beauty of what he says with range, right? He talks about these scientists in NASA, right? But then they love music, they go out and they one of them paints, they do these crazy things. One's like, a comedian or something. I don't know if that was this one, but you have to have that breadth, the ability to work across the breadth as well as the specialization to be really good at the
Yeah,
specialization.
you have to be that modern Renaissance person, that modern Renaissance man, like a Michelangelo or something like that, right?
I was so taken aback in reading your book when you were talking about oil and gas drilling and the statistical analysis. I said, what's this got to do with Children of Inmates. But, then when you tied it into the zip code and pinpointing it into the zip code, it was very interesting.
Yeah. Well, one thing we do too, Shellie, here is that we like to look at successes and where we can learn from different things. And Paul and I were talking about, we normally talk about a business case, like what can we learn from a business or a business case. And I think it sort of ties into a little bit of what we're talking about, because we landed on Polaroid as a business, right? So we all know what Polaroid is. We grew up with Polaroid. So
Sure.
in fact, this is crazy. I don't know if you've been into a Target recently or down the camera aisle. I guess they call it the camera aisle, but they actually have a Polaroid camera now. They're actually selling it again inside the Target, and it's like $70. So it's back on the shelf. And if you look at them, they did not want to innovate. They stuck to their core product, which you can argue is the right thing to do, but obviously they're out of business, so maybe it wasn't the right thing to do. But when we talk about generalists and specialists and all that, they were experts in that Polaroid technology. Right, that's what they sold, but they didn't move into digital. They tried, but it was too late. Just like Kodak, another one of them, right? And they stayed with their specific product, so they specialize in that. So in this particular case, from a business point of view, they didn't innovate, and that's the other thing too, is that if you can innovate, you can change things. You should change it. You shouldn't just sit around and wait for things to happen. So with this whole conversation we're having about whether or not you can use data to change the world, they had the data in front of them. They didn't do anything to change it. They stayed to their singular product. They might have expanded a little bit, but they didn't look.
Well, they ignored it. They ignored the data. And the people who shoot bulk film, like the film industry, that's all done digitally. That's all edited. It's shot in one location and it's uploaded and it's edited someplace else. So, Kodak missed a turn in the road. They didn't follow the data.
No. And then I think that's the key too. And I thought it was a good conversation or a good business case to talk about, because it sort of plays a role into what we're discussing. If you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to get the same results, right? We all know that. We have to learn it sometimes. But the changes that you're speaking about, using data to change that, break that cycle, to change, to elevate that child from this point to another point, to create that bond, that's something that's not happening, that needs to happen, and that should be the future. And that's what we think about when we think about things like this. I know from a business point of view, I always look at, okay, here I am today, what do I need to be tomorrow? And if you don't change, then you're extinct, like the dinosaurs, right? You're out of business.
Well, I think there's 2 points out of range on that. One is that, he points out, part of it is knowing when to quit, right? Knowing when you're not
throw your hands up and give up
and say, okay, need to move on. And it might be, I went to the University of Rochester, but they might have different views on this, because Rochester was a big Kodak town and everything. But, think about where all those people who learned everything at Kodak have gone and what they've changed, and that may be a good thing. The second thing is, though, for Children of Inmates with this, I think, as I look at it, one of the reasons I got interested in it, even though I don't have children, didn't know anything about kids, right, was that, we can't arrest our way out of our crime problem. We cannot incarcerate our way out of our crime problem. The cost and the burden is too big on society. So the question is then, how do you solve this? And what we know about children with incarcerated parents now is that they are 3 times more likely to have antisocial behaviors than their peers. They're twice as likely to have mental illness. Well, think about that. If we don't address those issues and deal with their trauma, we're on a pathway to not good things, right? And so if we're going to deal with this incarceration problem, and we have to recognize the cost that it has on those that are left behind.
Yeah.
And that really is why I like this program. I've been doing it. It's like, okay.
Well, I have to commend you. It's incredible. And I would love, Paul knows I try to be as active as I possibly can. And I have my children as active in different things as well. But whatever we can do collectively, or whatever I can do, myself, just let me know and I'll be happy to help. It's a great cause.
Well, thank you. I know a lot of kids would like to do this.
Oh,
so
absolutely. Oh, bring them. We'll
learn how to
schedule.
do this.
I listen. I love educating them. You know, I was trying to teach my son about business. There wasn't a book that I thought was good to teach kids about business. I actually wrote a book and published it, and I went around schools and Girl Scout troops and Boy Scout troops, and I taught kids about entrepreneurship and business. And it's important to know. You know that expression: you teach someone to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime, right? If you give them a fish, they'll eat for the day. That's sort of how I follow things too. So it's really interesting. Well, we're coming to the end of the show. So before we call it a night, I really want to thank you. Is there anything you want to get to our audience or share with our audience that we haven't talked about already that you think you want to focus on before we call it a night?
Well, before that, I'm sorry for interrupting, but how do people find you? You know, you're here, and how does someone reach out to your organization?
Well, we keep it simple. We are at our website's at childrenofinmates.org. Our phone number is 877-788-4235, which gets us there pretty well. So you can reach out there, and we always need help, and we need people to step in, you know, because I'm a geek, you know, we're not quite as good as some other organizations are at doing some of the philanthropy fundraising, but, you know, we're learning. So that's what we would need help with is, you know, we're trying to get the kids on a pathway.
Yeah.
And
do you have any type of like some type of a event coming up that we could promote or help you promote or anything like that, like a charitable auction or something along those lines? Do you do anything like that?
So on our website, we have a variety of options for donations where you can buy a teddy bear, you can stuff a stocking, you can
that's
do a whole
nice.
Christmas, or you can do a whole community Christmas, right? So we give you the full range of choices to do that. And so we make it easy for people to donate. And we are getting donations right now because we can't get the kids in quite yet, but we're trying to get them back in to see their parents. But we will get the toys out to them because that means a lot to them. And we tell them they're from their parents. So
that's wonderful.
So are you doing a toy drive?
We are doing a toy drive right now. And also we're trying to get, you know, those teens are the hard ones, right?
The teens, yeah.
We're trying to get some things together for the teens, and you know, they still like those electronics, and we want them to have that moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I really appreciate your time with us today. Thank you so much. And we love you. It's an open place for you to come and visit and talk to us some more. And we'd love to learn a little bit more about you. And we only have 30 minutes to talk, so I know it's kind of short, but we'd love to have you back. If you want to join us again, please come back.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Well, thank you for the time.
Thank you for coming.
So, so Paul, I guess we'll call it a wrap tonight. And I want to thank everyone for listening and joining us. And we'll see you out there real soon. This is Professor Ken.
And this is Professor Marino.
And we'll see you out there real soon. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you.